and to provide the certainty you need to invest.
Well, that was Theresa May talking to business leaders at the CBI conference. And what you heard there was the Prime Minister making sure that she didn't just talk about the divorce arrangements, she was also talking about the long-term vision, the bit of the Brexit equation, that future trade relationship that hasn't been sealed yet.
Because the UK is not just a European hub, but a global hub for services. And our future success depends on us continuing to be so. So we have agreed with the EU to negotiate a trading relationship in services more ambitious than any existing free trade agreement. It will deliver a level of liberalisation that goes well beyond WTO terms. All modes of supply will be covered, and it will remove substantially all discrimination in the sectors it covers. Regulatory autonomy will be preserved, but we will each ensure that our approaches are transparent, efficient and compatible as far as possible, doing all we can to avoid unnecessary regulatory requirements.
Theresa May, well, her stance is obviously winning support from Brussels. They're coming out to bat for her too. This was the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, today.
We are, in fact, at the decisive moment in this process. No one should lose sight of the progress that will be achieved in Brussels and in London.
Now, there is a view that we should get the vote on all of this over and done with as soon as possible. David Davis said MPs should have it straight away. He hopes and thinks the deal will be defeated, and presumably he wants as much time left as possible for removing the Prime Minister and reopening negotiations. One reason for not having the vote immediately is that one piece of the deal is not done yet. We have a divorce arrangement that doesn't cover the long-term future. We have a 7-page vague summary of what the long-term relationship might look like, but we still await a more detailed 20-ish page document on the future relationship. Can't be too different from the 7-pager, but there is still discussion ongoing. Theresa May visited Jean-Claude Juncker this week to discuss it. Whatever goes into that long-term relationship, though, has to satisfy both the EU and the UK. Failing to agree, we may well end up living in the backstop, which has been set out already. So what is there to play for on the long-term arrangements? Jill Rutter from the Institute for Government joins us now. So Jill, we tend to separate the long-term relationship and the divorce arrangements, but there is of course this link between them, because if we can't agree the long-term relationship, we're back into the divorce arrangements and the backstop, aren't we?
Yes, that's the absolutely key linkage, and actually that's the only thing that really binds you in the political declaration. The political declaration is basically going to be lots of words about, what might that long-term relationship look like, trying to give a bit of impetus and tell people that the withdrawal agreement's worth buying. But the really substantive bit is, unless the future relationship, in particular the future trading relationship, removes the need for a hard border in Northern Ireland, and both sides accept that, so both the UK and the EU say we don't need that hard border in Northern Ireland, we're basically living in the backstop. So if you like, that sort of presents a baseline for the future trading relationship if you don't want the backstop and you're not prepared to contemplate cutting Northern Ireland off.
And that's where we are. Now, that means the future trade relationship, does it not, whenever we discuss it, can't look that different to the backstop, because they've been arguing about the backstop as pretty well the only place you can land if you want not to have a border in Northern Ireland and you don't want to have free movement, which seems to be the British government's key red line. Then you end up with something that looks like the backstop, and that's what Chequers was. The Chequers looked very like that, didn't it?
Chequers did look quite like that. I mean, obviously you could go further than the backstop. So, Jeremy Corbyn's been saying, doesn't like this temporary customs arrangement. You could call that a permanent customs arrangement. It could just be a never-ending customs arrangement. The second thing you could do is, whereas Northern Ireland, remember that swimming pool analogy we had last week, Northern Ireland's in the deep end having to conform to single market regulations on goods, you could put the rest of Great Britain into there if you wanted. That's one way to go. The other way to go, obviously, is to decide that you are going to have a very different regime for Northern Ireland, and then you would open up new possibilities for the rest of Great Britain. But that's the sort of thing that the Prime Minister has said is unacceptable, sort of leaving Northern Ireland into a long-term in a very different regulatory and customs regime to the rest of Great Britain.
Well, by the time you're debating this, the DUP may not have as much power in the Commons. But look, there is one other area where we know that many Brexiteers would like this long-term deal to go, that they think squares the circle in a completely different way, which is, and they'd like this written in, I expect, that technology may solve the problem, and that may will that potentially re-emerge in this 20-page document?
I don't know whether there'll be a reference to technology. I mean, clearly what's in the withdrawal agreement already is that if a way is found, and there's commitments that both sides will use best endeavours to find that. So if a way through is found that both sides agree is satisfactory to remove the backstop, then we can do something else. So if there really is a technological solution and one that the EU will buy, and remember, even when we were talking last year about the sort of max FAC technological solution, it also required a huge swathe of exemptions of traders, small traders in Northern Ireland who were bouncing back and forth over the border. But if you could find a way forward on that, and you've got some agreement, maybe some different agreement on agriculture and things like that, then you could imagine you could get to a situation where both sides say, well, actually, we don't think this relationship long term is sustainable on the basis we've got it in the backstop. This actually is good enough that we're prepared to agree to a totally different way forward.
One of the things I think that people find interesting is we've conceded stuff for the backstop, and people think if you've conceded, talked about, which are these geographic indications. So we have agreed to recognise things like champagne or Parma ham, these things, and it means it gives certain regions or cities of the EU great market power, stops us buying American sparkling wine with the word champagne on it, for example. Is it conceivable that, having conceded it for the backstop, we will ever get the right to sort of import American champagne or Australian feta cheese? Is that ever going to be possible again, do you think?
So in theory, yes, because what people in government would say, well, we've only conceded that until we get the new trading relationship in place. So it's got this, what they call an unless and until clause in it. So we've agreed to go on recognising all of those things until it's superseded by the new trading relationship, which is fine, except the thing we know is that one of the things that the EU is always incredibly firm on is these geographic indications. And remember also how they have to agree the new trading relationship. For the withdrawal agreement, it only requires qualified majority voting, so not all member states have veto power on that. The long-term relationship requires unanimity, and we know that some of the governments have been very, very stuck on these geographic indications, whether it's feta cheese, Parma ham, etc. So it might be quite a big negotiating ask. The question is, having conceded that in the backstop, can we actually get much back in return for acknowledging that? Of course, Scotch whisky is one of the geographic indications that probably has the most value lurking around. Something the US really hates is the EU's geographic indications.
Jill, thanks very much indeed. Rory Stewart is the Prisons Minister. He's been batting for the deal in the last few days, and he joins us now. Very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you.
You accept that the long-term arrangements that the Prime Minister was talking about this afternoon, they are constrained by this withdrawal deal, correct?
No, the long-term arrangements are free of this. This is a backstop. But you're right that his point of view, and you can see this from some of Barnier's comments and from the comments of some EU ministers, they think the backstop is too generous to Britain. So the reason why the backstop wouldn't be there forever is that neither the UK nor the EU would want to be there forever.
Some of your government colleagues, the famous five in the cabinet, Andrea Leadsom and Michael Gove and others, are said to be pressing for changes to this deal. They want to disentangle various bits. What would be your word to them in how they should proceed?
Essentially, we have to understand that this has been a 2-year, very tough, detailed negotiation in which the European Union has given concessions, we've given concessions. This is a very good deal. It's a much better deal than we thought that we were going to get. And
really?
Very much so. I mean, if you look at a lot of... If you look at many of the things that Europe was saying even a few months ago, they were saying that you would not be able to get access and markets on goods and get control over immigration. That was seen as cherry-picking, and that's something that's been conceded in this.
Right.
And that's very fundamental. I mean, that's fundamental to the way they would think about Norway. That's fundamental to the way they think about Switzerland. So one of the things that I really also feel very strongly about this deal is that it's a way of trying to bring some measure of healing to a very, very polarised debate in Britain.
It's the compromise. It is the compromise.
It is a compromise.
Yeah.
And actually, that's something to be proud of, because people who are pushing for a second referendum or who are pushing for a hard Brexit are effectively consigning 50% of the population to exclusion, and they're saying, we're right, we have democratic legitimacy, and we don't want to hear from the others. The advantage of this is that on the Brexit side, it gives control over immigration, and on the Remainer anxieties about the economy, it gives the economic certainty and the access to the markets.
There has been some speculation that it may not make it through the Commons, you will, to say the least.
Sure.
A lot of speculation. And what...
It is a good, well-negotiated deal, but for complicated reasons, many of them would find it very difficult to feel that they could support a Conservative government, almost regardless of what they felt about the deal. So part of the need here is to try to think about the next 20, 30 years of Britain, how we overcome this very toxic polarized state, which is why I'm proud to say this is a deal that delivers the best of both worlds. And of course, the problem is the extremists...
Or the worst of all worlds is another way of putting
Exactly.
it.
Well, that's always what extremists say. On either side, they all